On the morning of August 8, 1950,
Silence!
Philipp Schmitt, the notorious SS commander of the Breendonk torture camp, was dragged into the courtyard, tied to the timber post where hundreds of prisoners had once died due to his orders.
Ready!
No blindfold, no prayer,
Aim!
only one final scream. Heil Hitler! Before 12 Belgian rifles fired in unison. It wasn't just an execution. It was the moment justice returned to the very ground where it had once been crushed. Why did Belgium choose to shoot him right here, on soil still stained with the blood of his victims? And what happened inside Fort Breendonk, a place without gas chambers yet still called a living hell of human suffering, that made Schmitt a symbol of cruelty beyond forgiveness? Philipp Schmitt did not rise through the SS by talent. He rose because brutality needed a uniform. Born in Bavaria in 1902, he fit seamlessly into the Nazi machine. A man who followed orders when it suited him and created new forms of cruelty when he didn't. By September 1942, with Europe collapsing under the Nazi advance and Belgium firmly under occupation, Schmitt was promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer and handed a fortress carved from stone and silence, Fort Breendonk. The moment he arrived, something shifted. Guards straightened, prisoners froze. Survivors later said his stare felt like a verdict, cold, surgical, predatory. Breendonk, once just a damp old fortress, began transforming into something far darker. Under Schmitt, it became an instrument of terror. Not a camp with gas chambers, not a camp with crematoria. Breendonk didn't need industrial killing to earn its reputation. Schmitt brought something more intimate. Pain and abuse delivered by hand, suffering administered up close. He turned the fortress into a workshop of suffering, where he personally oversaw acts of abuse, beatings, and torture. Cruelty not as punishment, but as ritual. From 1942 to 1944, Fort Breendonk stopped being a prison. It became Schmitt's kingdom of fear. Under Philipp Schmitt's command, Fort Breendonk shed its last trace of being a fortress and descended into something far more primitive. More deliberate, more sadistic. It became hell engineered by human hands. Around 3,500 prisoners, Belgian resistance fighters, Jews, political hostages, were dragged through its gates, and almost all of them understood within minutes that survival was no longer a goal, only a delay. Cells shrank to coffins. Air thickened with moisture and fear. Every corridor carried the echo of someone else's suffering. The acts of cruelty inflicted inside Breendonk defied imagination. Guards administered severe beatings to prisoners, whipped prisoners, which caused immense injury until bone showed. Men were hung upside down for hours, repeatedly submerged in cold water, mauled by trained attack dogs. Some were physically restrained against the wall and literally nailed in place. And Schmitt wasn't a distant commander issuing orders from an office. Survivors, including writer Jean Amery, testified that he preferred to participate in the abuses himself, smiling as he watched men collapse as if cruelty were a form of craftsmanship. At least 303 people, prisoners, died inside Breendonk's walls. Hundreds more were executed. Thousands were shipped to Germany and Poland, to Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, and never returned. As the screams fade, the camera holds on a single hollow stare, then cuts to black. In September 1944, as Allied troops swept into Belgium, Schmitt slipped into the smoke of a collapsing Reich, convinced he could outrun the ghosts of Breendonk. He shed his insignia, hid his name, and vanished across the border. But justice followed like a shadow he couldn't shake. In 1945, Dutch authorities found him hiding in plain sight, a predator suddenly stripped of power. 4 years later, he was extradited to Belgium, no longer the feared commandant, But a fugitive finally dragged back to confront the screams he thought history would forget. By June 1949, the walls of Fort Breendonk could no longer hide Philipp Schmitt. He was dragged into the military courtroom in Antwerp, no longer the feared commandant, just a man surrounded by the very voices he once tried to silence. The room was packed with survivors. Men with hollow eyes, women still carrying the tremor of old terror, families holding photographs of those who never returned. One by one, they stood and told the court what Breendonk had done to them. The torture rooms were steeped in suffering. Dogs tearing into flesh, friends beaten until their ribs cracked like dry branches. The truth was overwhelming. But Schmitt sat there unmoved. When asked for his response, he leaned forward and delivered the same cold refrain. "I only followed orders." Then, almost mockingly, he added, "Breendonk was merely a labor camp." Witnesses gasped. Some wept. And when he smirked, actually smirked, at the testimony of those who survived his beatings, the courtroom felt the sting of a cruelty that had not faded with time. His denial wasn't just a legal defense. It was an insult to every broken body, every stolen life, every scar carved into Breendonk's stone.
He was holding
And it sealed the public's fury more tightly than any verdict ever could. In November 1949, the military court in Antwerp delivered the judgment the survivors had waited years to hear. The room fell still as the presiding judge rose, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Death by firing squad. No hesitation, no leniency. Every appeal Schmitt had attempted was rejected, stripped away like the last pieces of a crumbling facade.
Lethal injection.
His fate wasn't just decided, it was nailed shut. Reporters outside scrambled to print the headline, "Schmitt condemned to death." But inside the courtroom, the verdict felt heavier, almost ceremonial. It wasn't vengeance. It was the world finally answering the screams still trapped in Breendonk's walls. As the gavel struck, the tension shattered, leaving behind an eerie quiet. The kind that follows a storm, not before it. And from that silence, the scene slowly dissolves into a bleak, colorless dawn. The same dawn that would one day witness Philipp Schmitt's final steps. On the morning of August 8, 1950, Philipp Schmitt was marched back through the gates of Fort Breendonk, the same gates countless prisoners had crossed into terror. The Belgian government chose this place deliberately, ensuring his death would echo inside the walls he once ruled with cruelty. At dawn's first dim light, Schmitt was tied to a wooden post in the courtyard, just steps from the cells where his victims had begged for mercy. He refused a blindfold, refused a priest, and before 12 Belgian rifles leveled at his chest, he spat out one final salute to the regime he served. Heil Hitler, Deutschland wird siegen. Then the rifles cracked, and Breendonk answered. The rifle volley that tore through Philipp Schmitt's chest ended more than a life. It ended an era.
I'm very sorry.
A military doctor stepped forward,
The time of death is
touched the stillness beneath Schmidt's ribs, and pronounced him dead. With that single sentence, Belgium closed its history on firing squad executions. Schmitt became the final Nazi war criminal executed on Belgian soil, the last echo of a justice forged in the aftermath of occupation. But his death was never meant to stand alone. It was the symbolic closing of a wound. Belgium's post-war reckoning, the trials, the testimonies, the grief, all culminated in this one morning at Breendonk. Today, the execution post still stands in the museum, scarred by real bullet holes, each one a reminder that justice once spoke here in gunfire. The fortress remains untouched, preserved as it was under Nazi rule. Every corridor, every iron ring, every cracked stone is a witness. Schmitt's execution ended his cruelty. Breendonk's preservation ensures the world never forgets it. As the camera drifts slowly through the silent corridors of the Breendonk Memorial, every stone seems to breathe with memory. The iron rings on the walls, the damp air trapped in the cells, the bullet-scarred execution post. None of them speak, yet all of them accuse. They are reminders that cruelty does not fade simply because the guns stop firing. Philipp Schmidt's death on August 8, 1950, was not just the end of a man. It was a warning carved into history.
Can become architects of terror.
Wars may end, but justice cannot be allowed to sleep. His execution stands as proof that the world must confront its monsters, even when they insist they were only following orders. It forces us to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth, that ordinary people, given power and ideology, can become architects of terror. Breendonk refuses to let us forget that. The fortress remains untouched for a reason. It is a monument not to the perpetrators, but to the victims. A place where memory is not optional, where silence is not ignorance, and where every visitor is asked the same question: what must we do to ensure this never happens again?